Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to speak to you, which is a great opportunity for our all-party parliamentary group. I'm Anne Coffey. I'm the Member of Parliament for Stockport. Before I was elected as an MP, I was a social worker, so I have a great interest in the whole area of working with children and families. I'm also the chair of the All-Party Group for Missing Children and Adults, and the All-Party Group seeks to raise awareness of the issues faced by children and adults when they run away or go missing. It's supported by the Children's Society and Missing People. There are 620 all-party groups, and the membership of them spans all the main political parties in Westminster and both the House of Commons and the House of Lords. And it brings together peers, MPs, statutory, voluntary organisations, civil servants, and those with personal experience of using services. And we seek to influence legislation, government policy, and practitioners to make changes so that vulnerable children and adults are better safeguarded. We've produced a number of reports. In June 2011, we did a report on support for families of missing people, and this report influenced the introduction of the Presumption of Death Act in 2013 and the Guardianship Missing Persons Act in 2017. In June 2012, we did a report on children missing from home and care, and this led to a number of recommendations on improving data sharing on missing children and notifications about children being placed in local care homes from outside authorities. Their vulnerability to harm having been increased by a poor system of notification and data sharing between agencies responsible for safeguarding. The government accepted the recommendations, but I think there are still a lot of outstanding issues. In May 2016, we held an inquiry into the safeguarding of absent children. That is a category that was introduced in 2013. Those children who were reported missing and assessed to be at no apparent risk were put into an absent category with no immediate police response. That absent category has, of course, now been scrapped, and all children missing get an appropriate police response. But one of the issues identified from evidence submitted to the 2016 absent report was the way that age and sex as a risk factor was seen. So 16 and 17-year-old boys tended to be placed in the low-risk category, and generally boys tended to be classed as absent and girls as missing. An HMIC report in 2016 on the police force's response to absent and missing said that often the failure to regard was at the lower continuum of the risk assessment, where the risks are not so obvious. So how can you know that a child is being groomed online? The first time they go missing, they're actually going to meet the adult who is grooming them. So our report was very clear that to get an assessment of proper assessment of risk at an early stage, it just has not just to involve the police, it's to involve all the agencies and all the available data. The most recent report we did came as a result of our roundtable meeting in July this year on how to better protect children who are exploited by criminal gangs to sell drugs. Sorry about that. Who was there? These are the people who were there. It was attended by Sarah Newton, the MP, who is the Minister for Crime, Safeguarding and Vulnerability, police chiefs, Home Office officials, parliamentarians, Ofsted, National Crime Agency, Children's Society and Missing People. And it was also attended by parents of children who are being exploited to sell drugs, who talked to us about their experiences, as did a young woman who was a victim of exploitation by a criminal gang. What was discussed? We discussed a range of issues: problems caused by different computer systems, data sharing issues between agencies such as police, health and children's services, and within agencies across police force boundaries, different organisational cultures, sometimes within the organisations themselves. I heard of an instance where a parent went to report to a police station that his child has been groomed, and was told by the desk that the people dealing with it weren't in. Now that was a perfectly proper response but to a very distraught parent, it was a message that the system in fact didn't care. We also discussed the barriers to children disclosing. It won't tell us where they've been. If they won't tell us where they've been and who they've been with at the statutory return interviews, it's very difficult to assess the risk they and other children have been exposed to during the missing episode. The evidence is that children are more likely to share experiences with an adult who they feel cares about them and who they know. Many environmental factors make children vulnerable to exploitation. Their immediate family circumstances, and I think Simon gave some illustrations of that. But age of itself is a vulnerability, and children and young people are particularly vulnerable in adolescence when their peer group becomes more important and they are less inclined to share with parents and carers. And that's why the work done in schools involving, and particularly involving young people in informing other young people is very, very, very important, so that they recognise when they're being groomed. We have a tendency to blame children in our culture. The CSE victims in Rochdale were viewed as prostitutes, and it was the attitudes of the agencies that were tasked with protecting them that left them exposed and vulnerable to rape, and that view was shared by the wider communities. Now children and young people who are trafficked and exploited by gangs to distribute drugs are still too often perceived to have made a choice, and therefore criminalised rather than safeguarded and recognised as victims of the gangs who control them. This means that the young person continues to be blamed for their own abuse, the exploitation continues, and he or she becomes further embedded in the gang. We must change attitudes as a society and within the system, safeguarding system itself. The term child prostitute has been removed from law and instead been replaced by the term a sexually exploited child. And that's an important point. The language we use forms our opinions, so maybe we should talk about children being exploited to sell drugs rather than them as criminals. And the parents came, and this was the parents' perspective. The parents who came to the round table challenged the assumptions that we make on who is vulnerable. They were middle-class parents, caring parents. They felt let down by the system. What we heard from them was that the system, by its response, increased vulnerability because of failure to safeguard at an early enough stage, missing opportunity to support these parents and young people and prevent them coming to harm. Parents are a resource. The problems of reaching young people once they've become embedded in the gang are huge. And listening to the young victim at the round table and her experiences from which she will never entirely recover, the importance of preventing young people to coming harm in the first place cannot be emphasised enough. The other bit of work that I did was I was asked in 2014 by the Greater Manchester Police and Crime Commissioner to look at what progress had been made since the very high-profile Rochdale CSE case in improving the response to CSE by the police, other safeguarding agencies and the wider community. The report itself had very much focused on the experiences of children and young people of the system. And earlier this year, I revisited the report to see whether children and young people in Greater Manchester have a stronger voice 3 years on. What I heard, what we found was there was an increased level of reporting, which was an encouraging sign that attitudes and culture, both in organisations in the community, are changing. Greater Manchester Police have seen an increased reporting of CSE offences, increased flagging of CSE on the police computer, and increased intelligence reports. The heightened awareness amongst the wider public is largely due to the work of GMP and Project Phoenix across Greater Manchester, with various initiatives to raise awareness in the community. But of course, this increase in reporting has implications for police resources. There's a lot of work being done in school, but as Simon says, we're facing the challenge of the digital age. Young people can communicate every minute of every day, everything they think and feel. Most young people will have an account on at least one platform, whether it be Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, Facebook, or Tumblr. An estimated 97% of 16 to 24-year-olds access the internet on the go via mobile or smartphones. That means instant opinions, immediate information, and at the same time increased vulnerability. It is now estimated that 100,000 children aged 8 have mobiles. Predators can make contact with hundreds of children online. And we need to use the fast-developing technology to get information about keeping safe to children, to prevent them coming to harm and to make them resilient to grooming. Schools have an important role, particularly as children can be vulnerable to a very young age. But we also need to engage young people in developing messages that are effective, putting them on platforms that young people use. They will listen to their peers where they may not necessarily listen to us. And I was also very pleased to see that there were examples of young people co-designing services. The DFE-funded project Achieving Change in Rochdale and Wigan, aimed at preventing girls at risk of being sexually exploited being sent to secure units, was co-designed with children and families and young people taking on board what they said would work. It is interesting that what was important to agencies was not necessarily a priority for the young person. So the agencies saw CSE as a priority, but the young people wanted other issues sorted out first. Trust was established by sorting out their priorities through a consistent relationship with the worker, building confidence and resilience. And these are the hardest to reach young people, disengaged from a system that they feel has never listened to them. In another project, children were asked by Andrew Rowland, who was a consultant paediatrician, to design a questionnaire for health professionals to assess risk of children to CSE. Talking to the young people who were involved, they were concerned to get the environment right and minimise the intrusiveness felt by young people when they are asked questions by suggesting alternative ways of putting things. And young people have been involved in designing the Citizen Act, a platform which is hoped will be used by young people. So given all those difficulties, what is the way forward? Again, I would say that talking to children is not the same as listening. Listening is more than hearing words. The importance of what is understanding that goes on in a child's life cannot be underestimated. Without understanding the child's life, we will always fail to fully assess the risks they may be exposed to. And when we are designing services or trying to get information to young people about keeping safe in the digital age, we really need to involve them. Legislation, it's important that we get that right. There's been a lot of legislation, what works. But legislation is not only about prosecution, but about prevention and changing attitudes. Fundamentally, legislation fundamentally changed attitudes to gay people because of the laws enabling marriage between same-sex couples. Similarly, child abduction warning notices, for example, can help change attitudes in the community by the fact that if it is served on somebody, then clearly he is a danger to children. And perhaps that also could be used to adults who are grooming children for criminal activity, making clear where the adult's responsibility in relation to the child lies. Community resources, very, very important to engage those. All communities are different. There's different attitudes in black communities, Asian communities, and white communities. But we cannot protect children unless we engage communities. For example, in some of the communities I represent, there's a high toleration of domestic abuse, and that has a huge impact on children, which creates their vulnerability to future exploitation. Often that is not well understood. But we can't get communities to hear that unless the communities trust us. And often there's no agencies because of poor experiences they've had with us. But I think the very interesting thing, particularly in Greater Manchester, is the development of new ways of working together. And I was looking at the place-based integration approach, which has been rolled out across Greater Manchester. It's an extension of MASHES with professionals from different agencies, children's services, regeneration, health, housing, police, being faced in the same place. That will overcome some of the data sharing issues and the working in silos and help gather intelligence and therefore better assess risk in a community where traditionally people have not grasped. However, the value is in the different approach to the problems people bring. Like the troubled families approach, the idea is to deal with the whole family, starting with the problem the family have identified and work with them to find a solution. Traditionally, they would have taken their problem from one agency front door to be refused help because their problem was not serious enough to meet the threshold for a service response. By the time it was serious, it probably couldn't be fixed without huge resources, vulnerable children and adults being damaged and exposed to risk, and the families having become hard to reach, completely disengaged and distrustful of authority in any shape or form. To be successful, this approach needs good, trusting, professional and personal relationships, both within the team and with the person seeking help and the wider community. However, if it is successful and statutory agencies are perceived to be offering something to those communities, then it offers us the opportunity to have a proper conversation about those communities can better protect children. As police, you have a very hard job to do. And Simon is absolutely right. It is not your job to protect children, solely your job to protect children. It's all our job. It's the job of MPs. It's the job of all the safeguarding agencies. It's the job of parents. It's the job of young people. It's something that we are all engaged in. But if we can get those relationships between all these resources right, then I think we can make a difference in preventing harm coming to children.